Hello, everybody. It is Saturday night at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. I am Chris Weuve, and this is Starfleet Tactical. I thought I might have Alec with me tonight. I do not have Alec with me tonight, apparently. He said that he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to make it or not, but he would try if he could. And so frequently he's off doing animal rescue stuff. And so I know that there's been a number of times where he was going to be on the show, and then like 15 minutes beforehand, he sends me a text message, a frantic text message saying he can't do it. So that sometimes happened. But I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about a bunch of different stuff, including a trip down. I got to see the bridge again in their new studio. I've seen 2 out of the 3 studios now, and I got to go see the rough cut of the part 2 and part 3, I think is what they're calling it for the movie. I just and I'll talk a little bit about that to the degree I can, and I am pulling something out of my archive and talking with you guys about it tonight. Before I do that, I made a comment to Bob. He had asked me a question about whether I read his emails. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is that I'll send him an email. I'll send you an email about it, Bob. I haven't had a chance to look at the mockumentary, and there's always a danger in crossing the streams between what I do on Starfleet Tactical and what I do in my day job. And so there's a lot of things that I'm interested in that you will never hear about on this show because it's just too close to my day job. At one point, for instance, Alec asked me if I'd like to go on Trek After Dark and talk about Ukraine, and I said, absolutely not, because it's just too close to the day job. So in any event, what are we going to talk about tonight? Tonight, we're going to talk about basically, I'm going to read you a memo. I'm going to read you a memo that I sent to Alec 6 years ago now, December 2018, so 6 years ago. And it was a memo that was covered under the NDA. And it was, he and I had a conversation. I had read the script for what was going to be the 90-minute long movie. And I had some questions. And one of the questions was there was a reference to the Fleet Operations Console. And I said to him, well, let's just go ahead and go to the slide deck. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go to the slide deck. So here's where we are. As always, my employers will disavow all knowledge of my actions. Also, as always, standard caveats apply, including the fact I'm not using anything other than images I took myself this time, but recurring theme is if I'm showing a picture or something, it's for critical purposes. It's not, I'm not trying to infringe on anybody's copyrights. It's for criticism and discussion purposes. So here's what my schedule looks like coming up. So today is the 17th. We're doing a show. I had said that I was going to do a show next week. Turns out I'm not. I'm going to go celebrate my dad's 85th birthday, which was actually last month. But this is the earliest that all my siblings and I could get together with my dad. And so I'm just not going to schedule anything for that weekend other than hanging out with my family. It looks like the weekend after that is probably also a no, because I'm probably going to be headed down to Wright Sublet's neck of the woods again. And so, if that happens, I should know by Tuesday if that's going to happen or not. I'm looking forward to having dinner with you while I'm down there. And then for the rest of the, through like the end of October, I'm mostly available with the exception of the 28th of September. I don't even remember. Oh, I think 28th of September, I'm going to be in DC. It's looking like I'm going to be in DC for a professional thing. And if I'm not in DC, then it's a yes, but I'm probably going to be in DC. So you also see there the next 3 or 4 topics I think I'm going to cover. There's actually 5 things on that list, so I can't even count. The next show will probably be Chris Carlson and I talking, sort of finishing up our discussion about the literal combat ship. The only reason we're not doing it tonight is that Chris wasn't available. So I'm going to do this other thing that I've been wanting to do for a while. And I talked with Alec about it while I was down there and got permission to do it. then I'm going to talk about capital ships with Michael Vlahos's article about what is a capital ship. I'm going to talk about Mike Bosworth's carriers of large objects idea, which is basically a very cool idea that he had when he was still in uniform and working at NAVSEA. There's an article on Giant Freaking Robot about the fatal flaw in the BSG television series, the reimagined BSG. The bottom line up front is that the article is wrong, but I will explain to you why it's wrong, and we'll be able to have a little bit more of a discussion about that. And if I can, I may try to bring in Chris Carlson or somebody else for that, somebody else who sort of has some understanding of the issues involved. And then I'm going to go whole hog on Traveler navies and stuff like that, looking especially at the works of Martin Doherty, who's done some just fantastic stuff. Hopefully by then I'll have some props I can show, because a friend of mine is 3D printing a bunch of Traveler starships for me. So it's always good to have a friend with a 3D printer. And then eventually we'll get to the Exordium stuff, but I'm not going to get to the Exordium stuff until I finish. I owe Chris Carlson and Larry Bond a game design. And I've just been constantly distracted and haven't been able to get back to it and stuff like that. And so I decided I needed to go do that. Eric Madsen asked, is there a problem, Chris? And I don't know exactly what you mean by that. So be more specific. Oh, let's see. If you're asking about the chance to see Axanar finally make its debut, there's been a series of problems, and those problems are being sued a couple of times by Paramount, CBS, having to sue somebody who ran off with a bunch of the footage that they had shot. After that was taken care of, they looked at the footage and realized it was going to have to be reshot, and then COVID hit. And so I actually got a chance to see the rough cut, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. In fact, I'll talk about it now. So it's been a while since I've done a show. In the time period since then, last week, Tom Pope and I went to my friend Andy Presby's stuff and got his home office set up. So that's great news for all of us, because y'all have been hearing about Andy Presby for a long time now. Andy's going to be able to come on the show, and also his wife, Joelle, who is a science fiction author. You may recall that at one point I talked about the Dabare Snake Launcher, which was her debut solo novel. Fantastic book. Just a fantastic book published by Baen. I'm hoping to get Joelle on, but it was essential that they get this new sort of Andy's office set up in their newly refurbished, newly built out basement, newly finished basement. That's the word I'm looking for, because they have very young kids. And the problem is that if they tried to do anything from any place else in the house, you would end up with a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old participating in your conversation. So they didn't want to wake the kids, so they had to have this space down in the basement. And so Tom Pope and I went and spent a couple of days moving bookcases, packing books into boxes, moving all the stuff downstairs, carrying his heavy desk downstairs, getting it all set up, getting the internet all redone, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully Andy will be on the show soon. Before that, Tom and I went down to Atlanta for the Starfleet International annual meeting. And so we originally thought it was going to be something more like not quite a science fiction convention, but more like a fan club meeting where people get together and talk about stuff, et cetera, et cetera. By and large, what it really was a business meeting. It was really sort of a training seminar, et cetera, for chapter leads and stuff like that. It wasn't really what we thought it was. There was going to be some Axanar stuff associated with it, but there's some internal politics that got in the way of that. And so all the stuff that was going to happen at the meeting itself didn't happen, with the exception that Alec came to the hotel. And so there was about 5 of us there that were in the hotel. And so he came to the hotel and we did a live stream for about 2 hours in the lobby of the hotel. And that was a lot of fun. So I got to meet a bunch of the other Axonar people, and Wright was up for the day, and so that was fantastic. For he missed the live stream, but he was up for the day before when we all went to the set, and we got a chance to see the rough cut of the next two parts of Axonar, and it was fantastic. Now, no special effects at this point. This was just, people on the bridge and sort of some roughed in stuff. And the narration, the overdub was just a rough in. It's not the final. So what we saw was very definitely a work in progress. And in addition to that, we also saw some special effects shots. So they were showing how they were setting things up. And we saw some actors that you have not heard about yet being associated with this. We are not at liberty to say, but I'm gonna go ahead and say something I probably shouldn't, which is that I never thought that I would hear the words "I'll be back" in a Star Trek novel, a Star Trek TV show like that. And so how they got somebody like Schwarzenegger to come and be on the set, I don't understand how you could get somebody like Schwarzenegger to be part of this. But I'm just thankful that I can't even continue with this. You all know I'm bullshitting you on this. But we did see some people. In fact, at one point I saw somebody wearing heavy makeup, and I said, "Is that the guy who?" And it's like, "Yep, that's him." So it was really pretty good. Looking forward to finally seeing it for real. And oh, by the way, if you want to see a Star Trek fan film, the best way to see a Star Trek fan film is on the bridge set, sitting in the captain's chair, watching it on the main viewer. So I wish I'd gotten a picture of me sitting in the captain's chair. I kind of intentionally didn't, and now I'm regretting it. But I was sitting in the captain's chair watching it on the main viewer, and that was actually pretty cool. So that's what, so Tom Pope and I went down, had a great time. On the way down, we stopped in Nashville, Tennessee. They've got a full-scale replica of the Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee, including the statue of Athena. The statue sort of has its hand out like this off to one side. It was the right hand off to one side, holding a little statue in it. That little statue is 6'4". It is a monstrously large sculpture. It was either the largest indoor sculpture in the United States or the largest indoor sculpture in the world. I can't remember which one. So if you get a chance to go to the Parthenon, just do a search for Nashville Parthenon. It's just in a city park in the middle of Nashville. Okay, so next slide. Here's how this all came about. So back around 2016 or so, Alec and I first were put in contact with each other through somebody who's no longer associated with it. But Alec and I got in contact, and at the time it wasn't, I was kind of busy. Alec was kind of busy. It wasn't immediately obvious what I had to offer. And so, it just sort of seemed like it wasn't going to go anywhere. And so, we had a contact, and Alec had all my information. I talked with him on the phone at one point. He was still living in California at the time, but nothing really happened with it at that point. We then later reconnected at SphinxCon, which was in early November of 2018 down in Atlanta, very close to where the Starfleet International thing was. Like, you could see the one hotel from the other hotel. I was on a panel with Alec and David Weber, and Alec and I hit it off, and we had this conversation. Alec realized that, hey, we can fit you in this stuff. And so he started including me in stuff. He interviewed me. I believe that interview is on the CD for Prelude. He invited me to come down and see the studio. And I didn't get a chance to see the studio that weekend, but he invited me to come back down at some point. And so 4 or 5 months later, I went looking through my calendar. I can't actually find it on my calendar, but it was some period of time, not in the next year. I think it was before I actually moved to Dayton, where I am now. He invited me to come down and take a look at it. But before that, in December, he sent me a copy of the script. And so I looked at the script. He wanted comments on it, and I gave him some comments. I gave him a document that was 4 pages long, of which a little over 1 page was talking about the details of that story, and I won't go into that, but because I think some of it's still going to come out in comics or something like that. I forget what they're going to do with it or whatever. But in any event, it's all covered by a non-disclosure agreement. But Alec and I had a conversation that sort of goes like what I've got here. I said, hey, there's this in the script you talk about the fleet operations console. What exactly does what is the fleet operations console? And he says, well, the Ares is configured as a fleet flagship, so this allows Garth to sort of control the fleet. And I said, well, yeah, but exactly what does it do? And he says, I don't know what it does. And I said, I know what it does. Would you like me to tell you? And he said, yes. And so I wrote this 4-page document that had about 2.5 pages on what the fleet operations console does. And so I'm going to present this document to you all tonight and sort of talk about it. So here's what I had to say. The document was called Axonar Thoughts from 11 December 2018. And now, for the record, I have absolutely no idea if this influenced anything that Alec was talking about. I have no idea if Alec designed that console, or it's probably Dana Wagner, actually, because Dana's the guy who makes the trains run on time and does all the technical stuff. And, he's the guy with the drill and the computers and all the rest of it. So it was probably a Dana, and I don't know if Dana saw this. For all I know, Alec didn't even read the document. I don't know one way or the other. But I'm going to show you what I saw. I took some pictures down there, and I'm going to talk about this document. So, the Ares class are purpose-built warships. Ares herself, more importantly, is being modified into a command ship. That means more or better communications, which I propose includes superior data link capability. So basically, it's not just about being a better warship, it's about being more effectively using the capabilities already extant within the fleet. So that was my opening paragraph on this. Here's a picture of the bridge. So what you're looking at is the helm console, which is directly in front of the captain's seat. On the left-hand side, you have the tactical console. On the right-hand side, you have the fleet operations console. And I'll give you a close-up of fleet operations as we go through it. 2, in this case, the data link capability allows the electronic passing of information between ships. Specifically, it allows the passing of the following: track data, orders, and other communications and status reports, including fire allocation, etc., other sensor data. It allows you to pass all that through the data link. That's how data links work in the real world. So data links generally, modern data links generally have some ability to send text messages to it, but it will also here's what my sensors see. Here's what I'm designating this. You can look at a track, and if you designate it as a hostile, maybe the computer designates it as hostile or you designate it as hostile. You can go through and make sure that there aren't duplicate tracks in the system. And it's a way of sharing that data so that everybody has situational awareness. Now, up until recently, and by recently I mean within the last 15 years or so, those data links were only track quality data. They were not targeting quality data. So that I could see that there was something over the horizon in that direction or whatever, or I could see that somebody's tracking an airplane, but unless my specific radar was able to see it, I couldn't shoot it, even with Aegis, because that's track quality data, not targeting quality data. There's an inherent error associated with that. So it's got pretty big error bars. So I know that there's something there, plus or minus, X amount. And that plus or minus X amount is the difference between firing a missile and it hitting and firing a missile and it not hitting. And so I needed to actually see it with my own radar. So even if I knew it was there, if my radar wasn't working, I couldn't shoot. So the Navy bent over backwards to try to fix this. They first of all fixed it through something called cooperative engagement capability, which meant that one Aegis ship using CEC, one Aegis ship could shoot at a target that another Aegis ship could see. Then they added something called NIFCA, Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter Error. So what NIFCA allowed was for the E2 Hawkeye AWACS off the carrier to pass firing quality data to Aegis ships so that the Aegis ships could shoot. I think it also went the other way around. I think it also meant that Aegis ships could pass data to like an F-18 or something like that, and the F-18 could shoot without its radar being able to see it. But I'm not positive about that. I know for a fact that E2s were able to pass that information to an Aegis ship, so an Aegis ship could fire with its radar turned off, as I understand it. Now, let me caveat that in a couple of ways. First of all, the last time I was at sea was in November of 2014. I'm sorry, 2004, November 2004. So I'm coming up on my 20-year anniversary since the last time I went to sea with the United States Navy. Second of all, I was an ASW guy. I hunt submarines. Didn't do a whole lot of air stuff. So I was never an air analyst. I never got really deep into the weeds of how Aegis works, other than I was really, really fascinated by Aegis, and I've read a lot of documents about the Aegis Federation. Aegis is actually like 5 separate systems, and they all talk to each other, and you can have failures in the different parts, and it's actually a really, really, really seriously cool system, but it's not a system that I ever like figured out all the nuts and bolts and details of it. I just sort of, had conversations at work about it, but I never really worked with it. Now, on the anti-submarine warfare side, I know a thing or two about trying to find a submarine, and I know how to evaluate whether a team trying to find a submarine is any good or not, because that's what I did. And like I said, all my information is about 20 years old. I'm a little stale at this stuff. But so in any event, I think that this fleet operations console is about adding this kind of capability to Starfleet, because remember, first of all, this is early. They hadn't really fought a war in a while. And secondly, if you look at like the original series, you never see fleet actions, right? You see single ship actions as a general rule. There's a couple of instances, like when the peace treaty of Organia happened, that there was a fleet action about to develop, and there was a fleet action against the M5, and you sort of got the impression that every now and then they get together and like have 2 or 3 ships together and then kind of skirmish, but there was nothing like a really big fleet action where the data link stuff would make sense. You see stuff like that in Deep Space Nine, and you see stuff like that in occasionally in next gen, more likely in the next gen movies when you're dealing with the Borg. But in all those cases, you don't really see any displays or anything like that. You don't really see how that data is being passed around, and they seem to spend all their time talking to each other with voice, with the exception of like Picard saying, "No, really, shoot the trash compactor. Trust me, I've been on a Borg ship. I used to be a Borg. I know that you shoot at the trash compactor and everything will be good." That's a vulnerable spot, despite the fact it doesn't seem like a vulnerable spot. And he went and he did something with the console, and it passed it out, so everybody had that targeting data. But we really don't know how data links work in this universe. But my hypothesis was, this is really important, and it's all about the data links. And that's what that fleet console is about. Now, here we have a picture of Tom Pope sitting in the captain's chair. And it's sort of funny. The bridge feels kind of small. And I said something to Alec about, why is the bridge so small? Or, it could have been a little bigger. And he said, it's the exact same size as the shooting bridge for the original series. The difference between the two is that Alex's chairs are fixed in place, and as a result, they're not slid underneath the console. And as a result of that, there's less walk room. There's less room to walk behind the various bridge positions, and as a result, it feels really cramped. But the captain's chair is kind of nice. There's 1 or 2 things I do differently, and you can't really see it here, but pieces of the captain's chair are currently missing, like the intercoms insets into the chair aren't there right in that picture. But Tom's sitting there. That's after we watched the Axonar movie. I can't say that I intentionally went and grabbed the chair specifically so I'd have the best seat to watch the movie. It just kind of worked out that way, that I was sitting in the chair when I realized that they were going to do the movie, and I offered the chair to Alec. I said, you're the captain of this ship. Do you want your chair? And he said, no, I've seen this before. Just go ahead, sit there. And so I got the captain's chair. So that kind of worked out well. Let's see. So Wright says in the comments about being on a Tiger cruise in 2011, for what it was worth, the Tiger cruise, everybody, is something that the Navy does for friends and family. And so basically when they're coming back from a deployment, so they're off duty, they're off station, they're heading home. Frequently what they'll do is they'll stop by a port, and a bunch of people that would rather fly home than ride the ship home, and who, Navy coordinates all this, so they all go on leave. Some of them will fly home, and then family members, friends and family, can come on board, and you've got 1 or 2 slots that you can invite people on board. So Tom got to do a Tiger cruise on Andy Presby's ship. Now they were an East Coast ship, so they stopped in Mayport, Florida, and Tom spent like 2.5 days as they tooled up to Norfolk. If you're a West Coast ship, sometimes you fly out to Hawaii and you spend like a week on board the ship as it comes back to San Diego, or if you're going to Bremerton, it's even longer. And so Tiger cruises sound a lot better on the West Coast than on the East Coast, and they even do it on submarines too. So that's pretty cool. I've never been on a Tiger cruise, but then again, when I was at CNA, I got to actually go to sea for real. So I had decided a long time ago that if somebody offered me a Tiger cruise, I probably wasn't going to take it, because I figure I've got 87 days of sea time. Share the wealth with somebody else. Although that having been said, I would really love to go do that. So, all right. So that was item number 2. Item number 3, why haven't we seen this in Star Trek before? Why haven't we seen anything like data links before? Well, first, because in most Star Trek shows, we are talking about one Federation hero ship versus a small number of enemies. In other words, there's no one to data link with. They're all by themselves. And second, when there are things that look like Federation fleet actions, that capability is old enough it's become automatic. It's a variation of the idea that no one makes a movie today where the MacGuffin is a telephone. Telephones are just part of the background now. You all remember back in the 1990s when Sandra Bullock did a movie called The Net that was about the internet? Yeah. How do you think The Net would play today? So I think that part of what's going on is just the data link stuff is happening at such a low fundamental level that, nobody ever thinks about it. Whereas on a modern day US Navy ship, there's a guy who's responsible for a commander who's responsible for making sure that the data net works, the data links work. And you have to have set your gear. There's settings on your gear to make sure everybody can talk to everybody, etc. And it's actually kind of complicated. It's a lot harder than you might think to make all that stuff work, in part because you're trying to prevent other people from getting access to that data link, right? You need to make sure that it's encrypted, and so everybody has to have their crypto loaded, and they have to turn the widgets a certain way, etc., etc. I did an exercise this was more about just general comms. It wasn't really about the data links per se, but it was a multinational exercise. There were some Dutch ships, some Canadian ships, and some U.S. ships involved, and the Dutch communications officer was presenting a stoplight chart each day about which ships were able to talk to which ships with what systems. And when he first put it up, it was a sea of red, and they knew this exercise was coming for months in advance. And they had basically been telling the US Navy, like, look, we know here's the issues we're going to have from a communication standpoint. And it took them like 10 days to get all that stuff squared away. And I remember saying to this guy, aren't you kind of, doesn't this depress you that it took 10 days? And his response was, it took 50 days in the Gulf. So this is an outstanding success story, because in the Gulf, we figured out everything we needed to do to make this work. This was after 9/11, and the Dutch were with us in the Gulf for Iraq. And so, it took us a long time to figure out all that stuff. And so now it's just a matter of getting people to do it. We know what the answer is. It's just a matter of getting people to do it. So, okay. So next, 4, the Fleet Ops Console is the interface for these new capabilities that have been added to the Ares to enable Garth to command his fleet. The Tactical Console is about fighting the ship. The Fleet Ops Console is about fighting the fleet. And this is the Fleet Ops Console. And so it's probably hard to read for y'all. It's kind of hard for me to read, but you can always stop it and zoom in on it. But we're going to look at some individual pieces of it later. On the left, you have like phaser status stuff. And so the parts on the left, that left section is really kind of more about ship stuff, but the middle and the right is really kind of about fleet stuff. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is what I'm saying to Alec. The Fleet Ops console should do the following things. Allow the collection of information from a variety of sources. These include all the sensors of the ships in the fleet, the status of all the ships, including what they are targeting, and any tactical assessments that the other captains are making. So what's their status, who they're shooting at, what they see, what are the captains doing. Allow the display of that information, enable the evaluation of the information, disseminate the information out to the rest of the fleet, and facilitate the control of the fleet. Now, those words I was emphasizing there are the Navy's 5 functions of a combat information center, 5 functions of CIC. So I'm going to talk about Star Trek CICs in a moment, but those are the 5 functions of CIC, and I make the argument here that those are all sort of encapsulated in that fleet operations console. So basically, the fleet operations console is sucking in all the information from all the tactical consoles throughout the fleet, processing it into a coherent common operating picture, sharing it, and then promulgating Garth's orders back out to the fleet. So that's my conceptualization for what this was doing. So we've talked about combat information centers in the past, but here's a quick little refresher. So this is what's going on down in CIC. The ship is actually being steered from the pilot house. So it's up top. It's got windows. It's, in fact, the majority of the windows on an Arleigh Burke class destroyer are on the bridge or in the pilot house, as it's called. And there's like no windows anyplace else as a general rule. That's really where you see all the windows. So this is what the Combat Information Center looks like. This is what Winchell Chung did. What I gave him was this. And so that image in the background is an official U.S. Navy sort of schematic of what that looks like. And I sort of said, this is what the various things are, and Winch color coded it. So what you are seeing there, let me give you a little bit of a rundown. Anything that's blue is a chair. Anything that's sort of that yellow color is a horizontal surface. So there might be a keyboard in there. As a general rule, what you're seeing are keyboards or you're seeing a desk surface. And anything that's red is a monitor. And so you'll see that, they're not the only monitors though, because like right above the letter 1 there, those 2 rectangles that are at angles, those are actually equipment lockers below a couple of big screens. And those big screens are the main screens at the front of the room. And behind that, what you have is a small room that has projectors that are, because those screens are backlit screens. To either side of those angled boxes that are underneath the screens, you have 2 small rectangles on each side, and those are stacks of status displays, and they'll have like how your shot doctrine is set up and how many of each type of missile you have, and one of them has a camera that's focused on the flight deck so you can see what's going on, on the flight deck. Is there a helicopter landing or taking off, or is there a helicopter on the deck, et cetera, et cetera. It's just for situational awareness. And that's what CIC looks like as a general rule. And then in the lower left and lower right-hand corners, you have doors coming into the space. You've got a couple of horizontal tables that are plotting tables over on the right-hand side. And you have on the left-hand side, let me see if I got it marked on the other one, under Command and Control System Spy Link, one of those consoles there is the data link console. It's where you control all the stuff involving the data link to make sure that you can see stuff that's coming on board from everybody else, and what you're producing through your sensors is going off board so that everybody else can see it. So that's what a combat information center looks like. And it's not about the navigation of the ship, although they will occasionally, they'll send stuff up like they're the guys that have all the radars. There is a radar repeater up on the bridge, but a lot of times TAO will call up and say something to the effect of, have you noticed we're on a collision course? You should probably not collide with those other guys, right? And so there's the bridge and the tactical action officer down in CIC work to keep the ship safe, especially in crowded conditions. But CIC is really about the information stuff and making combat decisions. The bridge is about the safe operation of the ship, and that's not at all how they do it in Star Trek. So 5, in a modern warship, the ship is not fought from the bridge, as I just said. It's fought from the Combat Information Center. That's where the captain goes where there is a battle. So when you go to battle stations, the captain goes into the bowels of the ship. He does not go to the bridge. The XO goes to the bridge to maneuver the ship. The captain goes down below. That is where all the sensor feeds go to. That's where the weapons are fired from. That is the room with the big screens on the wall, lots of people clustered around consoles. So the Combat Information Center of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is actually what, in my mind, what a starship bridge should look like, but it's not really about the bridge. It's not about the navigation of the ship. Star Trek follows a long science fiction tradition, also present in the Honor Harrington series, of unifying command decision-making on the bridge of a spacecraft rather than bifurcating maneuvering the bridge from combat, the CIC. So Star Trek isn't the only one that sort of takes all those functions and put them together. In fact, if you go back in time, up through World War II, up until right before World War II, you fought from the bridge. The captain or the admiral is on the bridge giving orders on fighting the ship from the bridge. It's only when World War II came about, and even then there was a lot of disagreement on this. World War II was when you started fighting from the bowels of the ship like that, where that's where the command decisions would be made. So if Star Trek ships have CICs, what are they for? Now, do they have CICs? I think if I remember correctly, there was a reference to CIC in the script. In fact, I'm pretty sure there was. We didn't see it in the script, and there wasn't any scenes in CIC, but there was a reference to CIC. You see references in the Honorverse about that. In fact, Tom Pope and Jacob Hollow are writing a story where a CIC figures quite prominently. So Tom and I spent a lot of time talking about CICs as we were driving to see the Parthenon and then driving down to Atlanta. So you can expect some stuff in the Honorverse coming out along those lines. But we see CICs mentioned. They're mentioned in Next Gen. They're mentioned in other sources. But if Star Trek has these things, what are they for? We never see them. I would suggest that the ARES CIC is originally there to support the tactical console, but in this case, they added support for the fleet operations console also. Basically, the staff of CIC collects, collates, evaluates, and disseminates information to the fleet ops console where it is available for the fleet commander's use. Since the viewer isn't going to see CIC, they won't understand that that's what's happening, but I would argue that it is. So you'll notice collects, collates, evaluates, disseminates, et cetera, that's like 4 out of those 5 functions of a CIC. I've made the argument to Tom Pope with regard to the Honorverse, to Tom and Andy, and I've made the argument, I think that's true here, that what you have, to the degree that you believe that there actually are CICs in Star Trek, I think there's a good reason to say, yeah, just don't believe those signs, don't believe that stuff. But to the degree that you believe that there's a team of people that are sort of pulling in all the sensor data, doing evaluations, running combat models, doing some simple tactical excursions, et cetera, and feeding to the tactical officer on the bridge a list of options. And so I think that if you believe in this model, what Worf is doing when he's back there is he is getting options through the computer that are based upon the computer and CIC making tactical evaluations and presenting him with things, and he's deciding which ones to go with. And those are based upon Starfleet doctrine, knowledge of the individual, intelligence information on the individual threats that they're dealing with, that come from databases, et cetera, that Starfleet intelligence has provided them, sensor information that they're picking up as is, and probably a healthy amount of my gut tells me X. So it's presenting him with a set of options. He's picking the options. Where do those options come from? I think some of that option might come from something called CIC. I definitely believe that that's what's happening in the Honor Harrington series. In Star Trek, I think you can make a good argument that it's really just the computer doing that stuff and just ignore all that stuff that talks about a combat information center, because we never actually see one. We do see doors labeled. I think in Next Gen at one point we see a door labeled that. I know that in the pilot for Next Gen and Encounter at Farpoint, there's a reference to CIC. I got all, by the way, when I heard that, I thought that's cool. We're going to see CIC, and then we never did. So, okay, so 6. I'm assuming that some of the other ships in the fleet have upgrades as well, either their own fleet ops consoles or added capabilities at existing workstations. For the ships that have received the consoles, this functions as their communications node with the rest of the fleet and gives them the ability to assume the command role if the need arises. It also means that they can be like local commanders, and it also means that you can break the problem up if you need to. Like in World War II, one of the things that they would do is, you had ships that had different ships that had CICs, and this extended beyond the war too. So you've got different ships with different CICs, and you'd have one ship that would be the flagship, and it would be the main thing, and it might parse out individual jobs to individual ships in their CICs. And so I think that you could do that with the fleet ops. And by individual jobs, I mean like these guys are responsible for air defense, and these guys are responsible for maintaining the surface picture, and these guys are responsible for that. And I think this fleet operations console, at least in theory, could give you the ability to do something like that. We weren't going to see it in the full up movie. We're certainly not going to see it in the shrunk down version. And like I said, I don't know that Alec even read this document. Okay, so 7, back to the production question. What should the 3 displays on the Fleet Ops console be displaying? Alec had specifically asked me that. What should be on these displays? I would suggest that they are status displays. So here is a close-up of that console. We'll get even a little bit closer in just a moment. What you have is the middle console, the screen says fleet combat status, and the right, I'm trying to remember what it says on the right. I can't quite read it either. So, but I think there's a close-up coming up. Actually, you know what? Let me put it on my bigger monitor so that I can make it bigger. It means that I'll be looking up when I do it. Yeah, fleet status report on the right-hand side. Down on the keypad down below, it says fleet status. In the middle, it says fleet combat report, fleet damage report. And then below that, I can't quite read it. And then on the right-hand side, it says phaser power levels, and it's got some other stuff like that down below. Okay, now I'll move it back down to my lower monitor so I won't spend the entire rest of the episode staring up at you. Okay, so one console should say data link status. It has 2 parts. On one side is a tabular listing of the ships in the fleet, which part of the network they are connected to. Basically, each ship is connected to the element leader. Each element leader is connected to the squadron leader, and each squadron leader is connected to Garth. As ships move and or links are destroyed, those links are reestablishing themselves based on local connectivity concerns. So this console is displaying which ships are part of the link and what the health of the link is. The other half of the display is a graphical representation of this network. My mental model for this is a computer network map. When a given network node is under attack, the color of the links change to highlight which ships will fall out of contact if the node is destroyed. Now, Alec and or Dana did not go with this particular idea, so we see nothing that actually kind of looks like this. But I will freely admit that I have an unhealthy relationship with my love of data links. So I'm really, really into data links. And so I would love to have seen it, but I don't take it personally that I couldn't convince Alec to love data links the way I do. One console should say fleet status in the display status information for the ships of the fleet. It's basically a tabular list of the ships with some health status indicators next to the ship name. A good inspiration for this would be some some of the information displays for video games. Maybe 3 graphic indicators, thermometer bars, color coded, etc., and a string of text, e.g., attacking Klingons, D7, shields failing. And so there's a little bit of that there. I actually probably should have included the middle console there, because if you remember going back to the middle console, that one says fleet damage report, and it gives you the sort of the health of the ship. And so, yeah, I should have included that. I screwed up there. Through the magic of special effects, I'll fix it in post-production. No, I won't, because there is no post-production. So the next thing is the final center console would be combat status, and it would be a geospatial display tracking the spatial location of all the contacts in their ID. It should be obvious whether the contact is friendly, hostile, unknown, or natural, e.g. asteroids. It's probably going to be too cluttered for there to be individual ships, so it should probably be by squadrons. I suggest Googling NTDS display for some ideas. Note in particular the lines extending from the icons. Those are speed leaders and are representing a vector. The line represents both the direction of the movement and the speed of the contact. So he doesn't have the speed leaders there, but on that console on the right-hand side, he does have a graphic representation of the ships. It's basically like a little radar display showing where things are. Now, I should say that this is just sort of what they had on the displays as we were in there looking at the bridge. I don't know what it shows in the movie. I don't know if you see any of the displays in the movie other than it's just the camera sort of pans around the bridge, whether you might see something in the background. I don't recall really seeing any of the displays, but there are, I'm sure they're in a couple of shots there. So it's really sort of just intended to be sort of background ambiance stuff. I don't know that they're really sort of getting into that. But some of that fits in the special effects category that I'm sure that hasn't been done yet. So maybe there is something there. I don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing, like the rest of you all. Okay, so there's more of a close-up of the console. Let me take me out of the picture real quick. So that you can maybe see it a little bit better. And so that's sort of focused in, and that's a pretty nice looking console. That's pretty nice looking. And I went looking for Easter eggs on this set of consoles, and I didn't find any, but I will admit that I didn't fully blow it up. There might be Easter eggs hidden there. There is something marked retinal scan. But other than that, I didn't really see any Easter eggs there. Okay, is that the one I want? I think, no, that is the one I want. Or is that the one I want? I want the one, yeah, that's the one I want. I'm trying to maximize the size of that so that you guys can see it. Okay, 8, and this was the last one. Sidebar, for years I have wondered why Federation ships use their main bridge display as a window. It's dark and there's nothing to see. A much better use of that display would be a schematic of the tactical situation with own ship in center, or in this case, a battle display with some of these smaller displays replicated on it. On TV, we sometimes see schematic data on the screen, but that should really be the default mode of use. Drives me nuts that they just treat it like it's a damn picture window, especially since it's dark outside and all you're really going to see is a reflection off the inside if it really were a window, and there's nothing to see out there. And so even if you do like computer enhancement, etc., all you're just sort of seeing is empty space. Let's go back for a second, actually, because I think there was something else I wanted to say about this. I think I actually already said the thing I wanted to say about this, which was go through and tell you what each of the different sections said. So yeah, I already said that. So that's basically what I've got for this evening. Let me go take a look at the questions real quick and see if there's anything that I can answer here. So Stephen Ross says no fleet-wide Death Blossom button. If there is a Death Blossom button, I didn't see it. It's hidden in there somewhere. And I also didn't look. I've got pictures of this tactical display. In fact, at one point, I need to ask Alec if he's got a blueprint and over like a top view of the entire bridge so that I can do call outs and show you, because I went and took a picture of basically every position on the bridge. But I need to sort of pull that together into something that's a little bit more usable, because I didn't label it. I want to make sure that I get that stuff right. So maybe somebody else gets the fleet-wide Death Blossom button. Wright says that there is one. So Wright was there looking at the thing. So I trust Wright. Wright also points out, or no, I'm sorry, One Horse Shea points out that they had a cetacean ops with whales and dolphins. That was listed as being I can't remember if we ever saw that on a sign on a door or whether we just saw a reference to it in the tech manual, but it's certainly in the Sternbach Okuda tech manual. So Wright points out in yesterday's Enterprise, there's background chatter over the ship's 1MC, that's the intercom system, referring to CIC. So yeah, they definitely had a CIC in yesterday's Enterprise. In yesterday's Enterprise, the Enterprise is a warship. And so it certainly would make sense to have something like that. So it's unclear as to whether that's, Prime Timeline has that capability, but it certainly has it there. Although, like I said, there is a reference in Encounter at Farpoint to CIC. One Horse Shea says that in beta canon for the Dominion War, Galaxy class got a CIC to command fleets. In fact, there is I can't remember how the canonicity of this, but the claim is that they had some extra Galaxy class space frames that they had built with the intent of fitting them out later. And for the war, they fitted them out as warships. And so that some of those Galaxy classes that you see in the background sort of doing stuff during the Dominion War were not the like sister ships of the Enterprise per se. They were like half sisters because they actually had increased capability specifically designed to turn them into warships. And my guess is that may be what he's referring to here. Wright says that he remembers Admiral Lee. He remembers reading about Admiral Lee, insisting that techs install a radar close to the bridge on the USS Washington when she received one of her refits in the Pacific Theater. Yeah, so the claim was that they actually cut a hole in a wall so they had a radar operator, and they cut a hole in the wall and put in plexiglass so that a guy writing backwards could do the backwards writing thing and put stuff up so that Lee could see it. Lee was actually one of the fleet experts in radar. He made a point. He was a gunnery guy first and foremost, and he made the point of understanding how radar worked. And he was so good at understanding how radar worked that that it was arguable that he knew the radar better than the people that were running the radar, because he was just a fascinating guy. I've read Ivan Musicant's Battleship at War about the USS Washington, which includes the Washington versus Hiroshima versus South Dakota battle, and it includes a lot of stuff about Willis Lee. I haven't read the bio of Lee yet. It's on the list of things to do, and I'm sure I will be gushing about it on this show when I read it. Let's see. Wright says that the movie Battleships show some of this function in CIC. I don't even remember that. This is actually but that does bring up an interesting question. I've got this question concerning the Iowa classes and what they did in World War not in World War II, in the 1980s after the refit, because they've got this, and I've talked about it on the show in the past when I showed all the photos of the tours there. They've got this something called the Combat Engagement Center that's relatively high in the ship. It's behind the armor, but it's where the admiral's cabin used to be. And it's where it's got the Tomahawk controls, it's got the Slick 32 controls and all the electronic warfare stuff. At least I'm pretty sure it's got that there. It's got the CWIS, and it's got basically everything except the main gun stuff, which is done through gunnery plot anyway. And it's like, it's got all the functions of the CIC. Did they actually use CIC for anything? I've seen one reference that said CIC basically was decommissioned because the issue was they had a bunch of new gear that they needed to get down into the ship, and some of it wasn't going to fit through the hatches. So it's like, how do you get this stuff through the hatches? Do you cut holes in the armor to get it down there? Maybe it's just not worth it. Maybe we'll put it all topside. We'll put it up high and we'll just create a new space that we can get the gear into. I've heard other people say, no, CIC was fully manned. So I know a guy that served on Wisconsin, but he has not responded to my emails yet. So I don't know the question about whether CIC was, for all I know, the reason why I've yet to be on an Iowa class that CIC is open. I've done tours of Wisconsin, and I've done tours of New Jersey, although I can't remember, I can't remember if they said that they would go to CIC in that. I know we went to CEC, but there was a below decks tour that we didn't do. So I really wonder whether CIC may have just been a storeroom. It may have been an admiral's workspace, because the idea was that they might have a staff on board. So maybe they just turned it into, they put desks and PCs down there and stuff like that, because all that stuff would fit through the hatch. The thing is, it's like, okay, it's got radar screens down there, but all the radar screens that would be down there would be connected to radars that they removed as part of the refit, because it's not like those 1940s era radars are any use anymore. So I don't know what they had down there on those battleships. I just don't understand. Let's see. So Wright points out the art design on the set is incredible. Yep, it really was fantastic. So actually, there was one thing I wanted to point out. Let me go back to, let's see, it's that one. Let me see if I can find it real quick. It was back at the beginning, if I remember correctly, that very first time I showed. Yeah, so like if you look real carefully, you can see in the upper left-hand corner, genuine 22nd century cardboard boxes. What you're actually looking at there, that's the door to get onto the set. So I kind of expected that they just do it through the elevator, but they don't do it through the elevator because, of course, they might shoot scenes in the elevator. So, and then they'd have to have a false back or something like that. So there's actually you come in right next to the main view screen, because usually what you're going to have is a view, that if you're looking at the people, that's about the place where you'd have a camera. So right behind there, there's, you go down a short set of steps, and then there's like a big shelving unit that's got a bunch of cardboard boxes on it, and I don't remember what it is, but I thought that was funny, that genuine 22nd century cardboard boxes. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. Wright says the Ares also works as a destroyer leader. Yeah, I think that works. Like a squadron flagship as opposed to a fleet flagship. Okay, going back here. Stephen Ross says he thinks the Death Blossom button is at the captain's chair. Could be, didn't see it. That it was, somebody said set over the intercom in yesterday's Enterprise. Wright points out that the bio of Willis Lee is great. And so Tony Craven says, I came in late, but could the fire control have been converted? I tell you what, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Let me give you a chance to retype that question, and I'll try to answer that. So while you're doing that, I'm trying to think of what else I have to say about this. Okay, I'm not seeing. Okay, Tony says, I was discussing CIC when he came in. And so, by the way, welcome, Tony. I don't recognize your name. I know we've got one other person, Cosmo Flanker, who's new to the show. He said that he's been going through the archives, but he thinks this is the first one that he's actually going to get a chance to see live, and so that's fantastic. Glad to have new people show up. Okay, if I was discussing, so I think he might be talking about the Wisconsin. Yeah, I mean, I know that the main gunnery plot stayed the same for the Iowa classes because that's how you aimed the main guns, and there was no point in changing it because the mechanical computers were as accurate as you needed to fire those guns. And why replace something that was totally and completely working? Um, but but I know that the fire control basically for the main gun stayed the same, but they added some other stuff on there. And primarily that they had harpoon, they added harpoon, and they added sea whiz, and they added tomahawk, and those were the big ones that they added onto that. And so there also had to be a place where they put new radars and stuff on, and there had to be a place for that stuff to come down to too. um but other than that, I don't know. So okay, I think that's about it for this evening, everybody. And so like I said, I'm probably the next show is probably either going to be one of three things. It's either going to be sort of wrapping up the literal combat ship discussion with Chris Carlson. The other possibility is Michael Vlahos's article about what is a capital ship and how to think about capital ships. Or the other possibility is probably the giant freaking robot discussion about the fatal flaw in Battlestar Galactica, and I'll tell you why the giant freaking robot people don't understand this stuff as well as I do and as well as you do, because you guys all show up on a weekly basis, and I'm always honored that you're willing to spend your Saturday night listening to me talk and whoever I have on the show with me. And that's just fantastic. So I think that's good, and I think you guys know a lot by virtue of the fact that you're here to witness and participate in these discussions. Pat Doyle says hi, by the way. He's currently flying his Skybus someplace. He gave me a call this morning from his hotel, wherever he was, and he was getting ready to get on an airplane and fly away. So Pat is still planning on being on the program when he can, but right now he's at the bottom at the totem pole at his airline, so he gets to go where and when they tell him to go. So that's just kind of how that works. Let's see. Tony says that he didn't know they kept the mechanical stuff, and so yeah, they kept all that stuff. They actually thought about replacing all the mechanical fire control computers on the Wisconsin and the other Iowa class ships, and they came to two conclusions. One is that it would be horrendously expensive to replace that stuff with software, and the second is it wouldn't get any better. That the stuff they had was low mileage. It hadn't been used very much. So, so everything was in pretty good mechanical shape, and it was really, really accurate. It was about as accurate as you can get because, at some level, the accuracy issue is going to be the powder bags. That's one of the issues they had, is that they weren't turning the powder. Theoretically, the powder is supposed to be rotated every 6 months. So that because there's different size grains in the bag and you want them all to burn in a particular way. And if you don't turn it, it settles and you end up with asymmetric burning. And as a result, it becomes a little bit unpredictable when you fire a shell, because it doesn't like one bag to the next won't have the same characteristics. That turned out to be an issue. And plus the other thing is, by the time the 1980s rolled around, all that gunpowder was 40 years old. So yeah, gunpowder has a long shelf life, but it's not infinite. And so you end up with issues about it doesn't, you don't quite know how it's going to burn, how fast it's going to burn, how fast it's going to build pressure. As a result, how fast the round is going to come out of the barrel. You don't know how fast the round's going to come out of the barrel. It's really tough to predict exactly where it's going to land. Those were issues. So that was a much bigger source of error than anything having to do with the fact that they had a computer that actually had gears in it. So Michael Kocher asks if there's a fleet ops console on board the Ares. Is there flight ops to control shuttles and workbees and even fighters if they have any? Never seen anything like that. And it's not. They don't do flight ops in the same way that say a Navy aircraft carrier does. If on board a destroyer, the way that flight ops work is that you've got the tower, which is if you look at a picture of the hangar of Flight 2A or a tycho, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll probably see a window. And so the hangar is just a little, the tower is just a little platform that somebody stands up there. You know, they have a little ladder, they go up there, and there's a little cubicle up there where they can look out and they can give landing instructions. There's also a cupola that's on the deck frequently, and that's for the RAST system, and that's operated by another member of the flight crew. So it's the person operating that is a pilot. RAST is a way to land in heavy seas. Basically, the helicopter lowers a line, they attach a heavier line to it, which goes up. I think they attach a heavier line. Maybe they use that line. I can't remember. In any event, what you end up happening is the helicopter attached to a winch on the ship. And so what the helicopter does is the helicopter puts upward pressure on, so it keeps that line taut. And as the ship goes up and down, the helicopter goes up and down. What you're trying to avoid is the helicopter coming down at the same time the ship is going up and it slams into the helicopter. So basically, you have the pilot giving it like go up, go up, go up, and basically they just winch it down to the deck, and it means that you can land in a lot heavier seas than you do normally. That's controlled by a separate little control room that's off to one side of the flight deck. Near the hangar on the vertical side, they've got the tower, and that's where you get final landing instructions, et cetera, et cetera. The actual air traffic control bit of that is done from the Combat Information Center, and it's just somebody on the radar there doing the air traffic control, and they turn it over to the tower. Usually the tower guy is the dispersing officer. So it's like the one thing that there's a supply officer, and then the junior supply officer is called the dispersing officer. And so it's generally a two-man shop, and the dispersing officer, that's his thing. That's his thing. Because other than that, he's just ordering supplies and stuff like that. So he's the guy who gets to man that. And I forget if Suppo has a battle station, but his dispersing officer's battle station is to go be ready to do tower stuff if he needs to. Okay, so I think we have reached the end of the show. So once again, thank you very much for being willing to spend your Saturday night with me. I really appreciate that. Won't be here next week, like I said. But won't be here next week. Unclear about the week after. The week after that, we should be in smooth sailing. So next week, unclear, or next week is a no. Week after that is a probably no, but unclear. And then after that. So with that in mind, everybody, thank you very much. Have a good weekend. Have a good week. See you next time.